Before we satisfyingly begin, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from today. And stay until the end, because what this little girl whispers to a police dog in a packed courtroom will leave you absolutely speechless. The fluorescent lights hummed above Courtroom 4B, casting their cold white glow across rows of polished wooden benches filled with attorneys, journalists, and spectators who had arrived early to secure their seats. Everyone knew what was at stake today. Everyone understood that the prosecution's entire case hinged on the testimony of a single witness. A 3-year-old girl named Lily who hadn't spoken a complete sentence in 6 weeks. The defense attorney adjusted his tie with the confident calm of a man who believed he had already won. The judge shuffled papers at her bench, her reading glasses perched low on her nose. And near the witness stand, a Belgian Malinois named Briggs lay with his head resting on his front paws, his dark eyes tracking every movement in the room with the quiet intensity of a dog who had seen things most humans couldn't imagine. Officer Tessa Vance stood near the back wall in her dress uniform, her hands clasped behind her back so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She watched the side door where Lily would enter any moment now. 6 weeks of investigation. 6 weeks of dead ends and breakthrough moments, and sleepless nights. 6 weeks of watching a traumatized child communicate only through silence and scattered drawings. And it all came down to this. Tessa's throat felt dry. She had testified in dozens of cases over her 8 years on the force, but she had never felt this particular kind of dread settling into her bones. Because she knew what the defense would argue. She knew what everyone in this room was thinking. A 3-year-old couldn't possibly provide reliable testimony. A 3-year-old who hadn't spoken since the night her world shattered definitely couldn't. The side door opened with a soft click that somehow echoed through the entire courtroom. A woman from Child Services appeared first, her hand extended behind her. And then, Lily. She was impossibly small in her pale blue dress, her blonde hair pulled back with a ribbon that someone had clearly spent time arranging just right. Her eyes swept across the room and immediately dropped to the floor. Her free hand clutched something against her chest. A worn stuffed rabbit that had seen better days. Tessa's heart clenched as she watched the little girl take her first hesitant steps into the courtroom. The prosecutor rose from his seat with a careful smile, speaking in soft tones that didn't quite hide his nervous energy. But Lily wasn't looking at him. Her gaze had lifted from the floor and locked onto something near the witness stand. Briggs had raised his head the moment she entered. His ears rotated forward. His tail gave a single slow wag against the carpet. And for the first time since Tessa had found her 6 weeks ago in that nightmare of a house, something flickered across Lily's face that looked almost like recognition, like safety, like the faintest ghost of hope. The child services worker guided Lily toward the witness stand, speaking gentle encouragements that Lily didn't seem to hear. The prosecutor approached slowly, crouching down to Lily's level with practiced patience. He asked if she remembered him from their preparation sessions. He asked if she could tell everyone her name. He asked if she understood that she needed to tell the truth. Lily's lips pressed together. Her fingers tightened on the stuffed rabbit. She didn't speak. The defense attorney leaned back in his chair with an expression that made Tessa want to cross the room and remove it from his face permanently. And then Lily did something no one expected. She pulled her hand free from the child services worker. She stepped sideways, away from the prosecutor's outstretched hand. She walked past the witness stand entirely, her small feet padding across the carpet with sudden purpose. And she sat down directly beside Briggs, tucking herself against his side as if she belonged there. As if she had always belonged there. The dog didn't flinch. He simply shifted his weight to accommodate her, his massive head turning to rest gently against her small shoulder. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The judge raised her gavel but didn't strike it, her eyes fixed on the scene unfolding before her. The prosecutor froze mid-crouch, clearly unsure whether to intervene. Tessa stepped forward from the back wall without thinking. She didn't know what she intended to do. She just knew that something was happening. Something important. And she needed to be closer. Lily leaned in toward Briggs's ear. Her lips moved, and even from 15 feet away, Tessa could see her partner's body change. The subtle stiffening of his muscles, the slight widening of his eyes, the way his breathing seemed to pause as the child whispered words only he could hear. Tessa's face went pale, because she knew that look. She had seen it dozens of times over the 4 years she and Briggs had worked together. She had seen it when he detected explosives at a crowded stadium. She had seen it when he tracked a missing person through miles of wilderness. She had seen it in that house 6 weeks ago, when he refused to leave a closet door that the forensic team had nearly overlooked. That look meant Briggs understood something. It meant he had processed information that changed everything. And right now, that look was directed at a 3-year-old girl who hadn't spoken in 6 weeks. The judge finally found her voice. She asked the prosecutor to please get control of his witness. She reminded everyone that the court had approved the presence of a comfort animal, but that proper procedures still needed to be followed. The defense attorney stood, already launching into an objection about the irregularity of the situation. But no one moved to separate Lily from Briggs, because no one in that courtroom could deny what they were seeing. The child who had been frozen with terror moments ago was now calm. Her shoulders had relaxed. Her grip on the stuffed rabbit had loosened. And when she lifted her face from Briggs's fur, her eyes weren't empty anymore. They were determined. 6 weeks earlier, the dispatch call had come through at 4:47 p.m. on a Tuesday that felt like every other Tuesday. Welfare check requested. Quiet suburban neighborhood. Neighbors reported hearing a child crying intermittently for approximately 3 days. Possible domestic situation. Tessa had acknowledged the call and glanced over at Briggs in the passenger seat of her patrol vehicle. His ears had already perked forward, his body shifting into that particular alertness that told her he sensed something in her tone. She reached over and scratched behind his ear briefly. "Probably nothing," she murmured. "Probably just a sick kid and overwhelmed parents." Briggs made a low sound in his throat that she had learned to interpret as skepticism. The house looked normal enough from the outside. Small 2-story colonial with faded yellow siding and a lawn that needed mowing but wasn't completely neglected. A plastic tricycle sat abandoned near the front steps. The windows were dark despite the overcast sky. Tessa approached the front door with Briggs at her heel, her hand resting casually near her radio. She knocked 3 times. Called out that she was with the police department, that they had received a call about a child, that she just wanted to make sure everyone was okay. Silence answered her, but not complete silence. Somewhere inside, muffled and barely audible through the door, a small voice was crying. Tessa knocked again, harder. She announced herself again, louder. The crying continued without pause. No footsteps approached. No adult voice called back. She tried the doorknob. Locked. She moved to the window beside the door and cupped her hands against the glass, peering through a gap in the curtains. The living room beyond was dim and cluttered. Toys scattered across the floor. Dishes piled on a coffee table. And sitting alone on a stained couch, hugging her knees to her chest, a small girl with tangled blonde hair and a face streaked with dried tears. Tessa's training kicked in immediately. She radioed for backup and child services. She announced loudly through the window that she was coming inside, that she was there to help, that everything was going to be okay. The little girl on the couch didn't move, didn't look up, just kept crying those quiet, exhausted sobs that sounded like they had been going on for days. Tessa circled to the back of the house with Briggs close beside her. The back door's lock was flimsy, the kind that gave way with one solid kick. She cleared the kitchen first, then moved toward the living room. Briggs stayed at her hip, his nose working constantly, cataloging scents that told stories Tessa couldn't read yet. The smell hit her before she reached the living room. Dirty diapers. Spoiled food. Something else beneath it all. Something metallic and wrong. Tessa's stomach tightened, but she kept her voice steady as she approached the couch. "Hey there, sweetheart. I'm Officer Tessa. I'm here to help you. Can you tell me your name?" The girl finally looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. Her lips were cracked. And when she opened her mouth, nothing came out. Just silence, and the faint trembling of a child who had seen something that stole her voice completely. Tessa crouched there for a long moment, studying the child's face while Briggs remained perfectly still beside her. She had seen trauma before. She had responded to domestic calls where children hid in closets and flinched at sudden sounds. But this was different. This girl wasn't just scared. She was somewhere else entirely, locked inside herself like a door had been slammed shut and the key thrown away. Tessa didn't push for a response. She simply sat down on the floor a few feet from the couch, making herself small and unthreatening, and waited. Backup arrived within minutes. Then child services. Then forensics. The small yellow house filled with bodies and voices and the crackling static of radios. And through all of it, the little girl on the couch never moved. Never spoke. A social worker named Patricia eventually coaxed her off the cushions with soft words and a juice box. But even then, silence. Just those hollow eyes tracking movement without comprehension. Tessa stayed near the living room entrance, watching the chaos unfold, until Briggs did something that made her spine straighten. He pulled against his lead. Not hard. Not desperately. Just a steady, insistent pressure toward the hallway that led deeper into the house. Tessa knew that pull. She had learned to trust it more than her own instincts over the years. She gave him slack and followed, her hand drifting to her holster out of habit. The hallway was narrow and dark, lined with family photos that showed happier times. A young woman with auburn hair holding an infant, birthday parties, beach trips, normal life captured in frames now covered with dust. Briggs moved past all of it without interest. His attention was fixed on something ahead. The forensic team had already cleared most of the house. Tessa could hear them in the back bedroom, their voices low and serious as they documented something she didn't want to see yet. But Briggs wasn't heading toward them. He stopped at a closet door halfway down the hall, a door so ordinary and unremarkable that anyone might walk past it a dozen times without a second thought. His nose pressed against the gap at the bottom. His body went rigid, and he looked back at Tessa with an expression that said, "Here." She called out to forensics, told them to hold their position. She approached the closet with her heart hammering against her ribs, knowing that Briggs had never been wrong about anything important in 4 years of partnership. She reached for the handle, turned it slowly, pulled the door open. At first glance, nothing. Coats on hangers. Shoes piled on the floor. A vacuum cleaner shoved into the corner. But Briggs was pushing forward now, nosing past the hanging clothes toward the back wall. Tessa pulled out her flashlight and aimed the beam over his shoulder. And then she saw it. A seam in the drywall that didn't match the others. A section of paneling that sat slightly forward from the rest. She pressed against it and felt it give, revealing a space behind the wall no bigger than a filing cabinet. Inside, stacked in careful rows, were documents, photos, phones in plastic bags, cash in rubber-banded bundles, and a laptop with a charging cord still plugged into a hidden outlet. Tessa's training took over as she backed away and called for the forensic team. She didn't touch anything. She didn't need to. The metallic smell she had noticed earlier suddenly made sense. Old blood, faint but present, seeping from beneath the floorboards of the back bedroom where the team was working. Someone had scrubbed this house. Someone had tried to hide what happened here. But they hadn't counted on Briggs. The next hours blurred together in a haze of procedure and paperwork. The back bedroom revealed signs of a violent struggle. Broken furniture, hastily righted, carpet with bleach stains that couldn't quite cover what lay beneath. The mother was missing. No trace of her anywhere in the house or surrounding area. And the hidden compartment's contents. When the tech specialists finally cracked the laptop, painted a picture so dark that Tessa had to step outside for air. Human trafficking. A network stretching across 3 states, The mother, according to what investigators could piece together, had been involved as a recruiter before something went wrong, before she tried to get out, before someone decided she knew too much. And through all of it, Lily remained silent. Child Services placed her in emergency foster care that first night with a family who specialized in trauma cases. Tessa should have moved on. She had done her part. The case was in the hands of detectives and federal agents now, people with more resources and training for this kind of investigation. But she couldn't shake the image of those hollow eyes. She couldn't forget the way Lily had looked at her in that living room, like she was reaching for something she couldn't find. 3 days after the initial discovery, Tessa requested permission to conduct a follow-up visit. Standard procedure, she told her sergeant. Just checking on the welfare of the child witness. He approved it without argument, though the look he gave her suggested he understood the real reason. Some cases got under your skin. Some victims became more than files and case numbers. It was the worst and best part of this job. The foster home was clean and warm and filled with books and soft lighting. The couple who ran it, the Hendersons, had 30 years of experience between them. They greeted Tessa at the door with tired smiles and immediately launched into an update. Lily was eating. Lily was sleeping through the night. Lily still hadn't spoken a single word. Tessa found her in the backyard, sitting alone on a swing that hung from an old oak tree. She was wearing new clothes that fit properly, her hair washed and brushed and shining in the afternoon sun. But her eyes were exactly the same. Empty, distant, locked away somewhere no one could reach. Tessa approached slowly, announcing herself from a distance, so she wouldn't startle the girl. She sat down on the grass a few feet from the swing and said nothing for a long time. Just sat there, watching clouds drift overhead, letting silence fill the space between them. And then Briggs, who she had left in the patrol car with the window cracked, did something unexpected. He barked. Just once. A single sharp sound that carried across the yard. Lily's head snapped toward the noise, her body going tense. And then something happened that made Tessa's breath catch. Recognition. Not just awareness, but actual recognition flickered across the girl's face. She looked at Tessa. Then at the patrol car, visible through the side gate. Then back at Tessa. And for the first time since that house, she moved with purpose. She slid off the swing and walked toward the gate, her small hands reaching for the latch. Tessa followed quickly, not sure what was happening but unwilling to stop it. She opened the gate herself and led Lily to the patrol car, where Briggs was standing on the seat with his head out the window, his tail wagging slowly as they approached. Lily stopped 2 feet away. She stared at the dog with an intensity that seemed too large for her small body. And then, without prompting or encouragement, she reached out and touched his nose. Briggs held perfectly still. His eyes closed briefly at the contact. His tail stopped wagging. He simply waited, and Lily's face changed. Not dramatically, not completely, but the emptiness cracked, just slightly, like ice beginning to thaw at the edges. She pressed her forehead against his muzzle and stayed there, breathing slowly, while Tessa watched with tears she refused to let fall. The child psychologist arrived 2 days later. Dr. Renata Moss had worked with traumatized children for over 20 years, and the moment she observed Lily's interaction with Briggs during a supervised visit, she pulled Tessa aside with urgency written across her face. "This bond," she said quietly, "this isn't ordinary comfort-seeking behavior. This child has formed a specific attachment to your dog as a safe object. Possibly the only safe thing in her world right now." Tessa asked what that meant for the investigation. Dr. Moss was quiet for a moment. Then she said it meant that if anyone was going to unlock what Lily had seen, what Lily knew, it would have to be through Briggs. The weeks that followed became a delicate dance between protocol and desperation. Federal prosecutors had assembled a case against 3 defendants, including a man named Victor Stoll, who had been identified through fingerprints found on the hidden laptop. The evidence was substantial. Financial records, communication logs, witness statements from other survivors the network had touched. But the prosecution team knew their case had a gaping hole at its center. Lily was the only person who had been present when her mother disappeared. Lily was the only witness who could connect Victor Stoll directly to the violence in that house. And Lily hadn't spoken a word in over a month. Tessa attended meetings she had no business attending. She sat in conference rooms with federal agents and assistant district attorneys who initially questioned why a patrol officer with a K-9 partner was taking such personal interest in a case that had moved far beyond her jurisdiction. But Drive Moss advocated for her presence, explaining that the bond between Lily and Briggs represented their only viable pathway to testimony. The lead prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Catherine Price, listened with growing skepticism until Drive Moss presented her observations in clinical detail. The child responds to no other stimulus, she said. No toys, no music, no other animals, no human comfort. Only Officer Vance's dog triggers any emotional response whatsoever. If we want Lily to speak, we need to bring Briggs into the courtroom. The defense attorneys objected immediately and loudly. They filed motions arguing that the presence of a police dog would unfairly prejudice the jury. They claimed it was emotional manipulation designed to manufacture sympathy for an unreliable witness. They demanded psychological evaluations of Lily that would prove she was incapable of providing meaningful testimony. And through every legal battle, every procedural delay, every attempt to have the charges reduced or dismissed, Tessa kept visiting. She brought Briggs to the foster home twice a week, always during the approved hours, always with Dr. Moss present to document each interaction. The changes were glacially slow but undeniably real. In the second week, Lily began positioning herself closer to Briggs during their visits, leaning against his side like she was drawing warmth from his presence. In the third week, she started making eye contact with Tessa. Brief glances that lasted only seconds but felt like breakthrough moments. In the fourth week, she brought drawings. The first drawing was crude and simple, the kind of scribbled image any 3-year-old might produce. A house. A figure with yellow hair that might have been herself. A dark shape that Tessa initially thought was a car. But Drive Moss studied it with professional intensity and pointed out details that made Tessa's stomach turn. The dark shape had eyes. The dark shape was standing in a doorway. The dark shape had something on its arm. A series of lines that looked almost like a tattoo. Lily produced more drawings over the following days. Each one revealed new details, like pieces of a puzzle assembling themselves from fractured memory. A man with a shaved head. A woman lying on the floor. Hands reaching. Mouths open in shapes that suggested screaming. And always, always, that distinctive pattern on the arm. 3 curved lines intersecting above a star. Dr. Moss photographed each drawing and sent them to the prosecution team. And when the detectives compared the pattern to Victor Stoll's booking photos, the match was unmistakable. Tessa was there when they realized it. She watched Assistant District Attorney Price spread the drawings across a conference table next to surveillance images of Stoll's forearm tattoo. The federal agent assigned to the case let out a low whistle. She saw him, he said quietly. She was in that house when he came for her mother. She saw everything. Price nodded slowly, her expression caught between hope and frustration. She sees him, she corrected. She remembers. But she still can't tell us what happened. Not in any way a court will accept. Dr. Moss proposed the solution 3 days before the trial was set to begin. She had spent hours reviewing case law, consulting with colleagues who specialized in child witness testimony, and assembling documentation that she hoped would convince the judge to approve an unconventional approach. Comfort animals were sometimes permitted in courtrooms during child testimony, usually dogs trained specifically for therapeutic support. But allowing an active duty police K-9 to serve in that role was virtually unprecedented. The defense would argue it was prejudicial. They would claim it implied the prosecution had the backing of law enforcement in a way that could sway the jury. They would fight it with every procedural weapon at their disposal. The hearing lasted 4 hours. Tessa sat in the gallery and watched Drive. Moss present her findings with clinical precision. She listened to the defense attorney argue that Briggs was a trained attack dog whose presence would intimidate the jury and undermine the defendant's right to a fair trial. She heard Judge Patricia Whitmore ask probing questions about Lily's psychological state, about the nature of her bond with the dog, about whether any alternatives had been explored. And when the judge finally ruled that Briggs would be permitted in the courtroom during Lily's testimony, provided he remained leashed and under handler control at all times, Tessa had to press her hand over her mouth to contain the sound that wanted to escape. The night before the trial, Tessa couldn't sleep. She sat on her apartment floor with Briggs stretched out beside her, running her fingers through his fur while she stared at the wall and tried not to think about everything that could go wrong. Lily had made progress. Real progress. But she still hadn't spoken. Not a single word. Dr. Moss believed the courtroom environment might trigger a breakthrough. The combination of familiar comfort and formal structure sometimes unlocked things in traumatized children. But she had also warned that it could go the other way. The pressure could push Lily deeper into silence. The presence of her mother's killer across the room could shatter what fragile trust had been rebuilt. Briggs lifted his head and rested it on Tessa's knee. His dark eyes watched her face with that patient intelligence she had come to rely on more than anything else in her professional life. She told him that tomorrow was the big day. She told him that a little girl was counting on him to make her feel safe enough to tell the truth. She told him she didn't know if she was doing the right thing by pushing for this testimony, by putting Lily in that room with the man who had destroyed her family. Briggs made a low sound in his throat. The same sound he had made 4 years ago when she first met him at the K9 training facility. A young dog with too much energy and eyes that seemed to see straight through every handler who approached him. He had chosen her that day, not the other way around. He had walked past 3 other officers and sat down at her feet like he had been waiting for her all along. And every day since, he had never given her a reason to doubt his judgment. She trusted him now. She had to. The morning of the trial arrived gray and cold, one of those autumn days where the sky seemed to press down against the earth like a heavy blanket. Tessa dressed in her formal uniform with hands that trembled slightly as she fastened each button. She brushed Briggs until his coat gleamed, checked his lead and collar twice, and drove to the courthouse through streets that felt strangely empty for a weekday morning. The security checkpoint took longer than usual. The bailiff who processed Briggs's entry seemed nervous, asking multiple times whether the dog was trained to remain calm under pressure. Tessa assured him that Briggs had worked crowd control at stadium events, had remained steady during active shooter drills, had never once lost composure in any operational environment. The bailiff nodded but didn't look convinced. Catherine Price met them in the hallway outside courtroom 4B. Her face was tight with the particular strain of an attorney who knew her case balanced on a knife's edge. She told Tessa that Lily had arrived with the child services escort. She said the girl seemed present, more present than usual. Like she understood what was happening today. Price didn't say whether that was a good sign or a bad one. The courtroom doors opened, and Tessa walked Briggs to his designated position near the witness stand. She settled him with a quiet command and took her place against the back wall, watching the gallery fill with bodies and voices and the shuffling of papers. The defendant's table remained empty for now. Victor Stoll would be brought in through a side entrance once the jury was seated. And then the side door opened, and Lily appeared, and everything that happened next would change courtroom procedure in 3 states forever. The child services worker reached for Lily instinctively, her training demanding she maintain control of the situation. But Lily was already settled against Briggs's side, her small body tucked into the curve of his ribs like she had found the only safe harbor in a storm-tossed sea. The courtroom murmurs grew louder. Someone in the gallery whispered that this wasn't proper procedure. The defense attorney was on his feet now, his voice rising as he demanded the judge declare a mistrial before testimony had even begun. Judge Whitmore raised her hand for silence. Her gaze moved from Lily to Briggs to Tessa and back again, calculating something that no one else in the room could see. She asked the prosecutor if he could proceed with the witness in her current position. Price hesitated only a moment before nodding. She approached the witness stand but stopped several feet away, crouching down so she was closer to Lily's level. She asked if Lily could hear her. She asked if Lily understood where she was. Lily didn't respond. Her face remained pressed against Briggs's fur, her breathing slow and steady for the first time since she had entered the courtroom. But she wasn't hiding anymore. She wasn't locked away in that distant place where no one could reach her. She was listening. And then the side door opened again. Victor Stoll entered the courtroom flanked by two bailiffs, his wrists shackled in front of him, his prison jumpsuit replaced by a gray suit that his defense team had no doubt selected to make him appear respectable. He was a large man, broad-shouldered and thick-necked, with a shaved head that gleamed under the fluorescent lights. His expression was carefully neutral, the practiced mask of someone who had been coached on how to appear innocent. But his eyes swept the room with a predator's awareness, cataloging faces and exits and potential threats. When his gaze found Lily, something flickered across his features. Something cold and satisfied and terrible. Briggs felt it before anyone else. His body went rigid beneath Lily's hands, every muscle tensing like a spring being compressed. A low growl built in his chest. Not loud, not aggressive, but present. A warning. A promise. Tessa took 2 steps forward before she could stop herself, her hand dropping to the lead that hung loose at her side. Lily lifted her head. For one endless moment, the little girl and the man who had destroyed her family stared at each other across the courtroom. The air seemed to crystallize between them, sharp and brittle and charged with everything that couldn't be said. Lily's lower lip trembled. Her fingers tightened in Briggs's fur until her knuckles went white. And Tessa watched helplessly as 6 weeks of slow, careful progress threatened to shatter like glass against stone. But then, Lily did something no one expected. She didn't freeze. She didn't retreat back into that empty silence. She turned away from Victor Stoll's stare and leaned down toward Briggs's ear, her small mouth moving in words that only he could hear. The courtroom held its breath. Briggs's head tilted slightly, his ear rotating toward her voice. His growl faded into something softer. A quiet acknowledgement, a response to whatever she was telling him. And when Lily straightened again, her face had changed. The fear was still there, written in the tension around her eyes and the paleness of her cheeks. But beneath it, determination. The same determination Tessa had glimpsed 6 weeks ago in her backyard when Lily first reached out to touch Briggs's nose. The prosecutor tried again. She asked Lily if she could tell them what happened the night her mother went away. She asked if she remembered seeing anyone in the house. She used all the gentle, careful phrases that child testimony experts recommended, her voice soft and patient and utterly useless against the wall of silence that had protected Lily for so long. Lily's gaze dropped to Briggs's face. Her fingers stroked through his fur in slow, rhythmic motions. And then, she spoke. The words came out barely louder than a whisper, but in the hushed courtroom, they carried like thunder. The bad man said monsters would eat me if I told. Every person in the room went still. The court reporter's fingers froze above her keys. The jury members leaned forward in their seats. Even the defense attorney seemed momentarily paralyzed by the sound of a voice that hadn't been heard in 6 weeks. Lily looked up at Briggs with eyes that glistened with unshed tears. Her small hand found his massive paw and held on tight. "Will you protect me from the monsters?" Briggs didn't move. He didn't bark or whine or make any sound at all. He simply held her gaze with that patient, intelligent steadiness that had defined him from the moment he chose Tessa 4 years ago. And then, very slowly, he lowered his head and pressed his nose against her forehead. A sound escaped from someone in the gallery, a choked sob that could have come from anyone. Tessa's vision blurred. She blinked hard and forced herself to focus on what was happening, knowing that this moment would be studied and debated and analyzed for years to come. Lily turned back toward the prosecutor. Her voice was stronger now, still small but no longer a whisper. "The bad man came to our house. Mommy told me to hide in my room. I heard her yelling. I heard her fall down." She paused, her breath catching. Briggs pressed closer against her side. "I came out of my room. I saw the bad man standing over Mommy. He had that thing on his arm, the lines and the star." Price moved carefully, not wanting to break the spell. "Can you tell us which man you saw, Lily? Is he in this room?" The little girl's gaze swept across the courtroom. It passed over the jury, the gallery, the judge's bench, and then it stopped on the defendant's table, where Victor Stoll sat with his coached expression finally cracking at the edges. Lily's finger rose and pointed directly at him. "That's the bad man. He hurt my mommy. He said the monsters would come for me if I ever told anyone." Her voice wavered but didn't break. "But Briggs isn't scared of monsters. And neither am I." The defense attorney was on his feet instantly, objecting that the testimony was coached, that the child had been manipulated, that the presence of the police dog had prejudiced the witness. Judge Whitmore overruled each objection with mounting impatience. The prosecutor asked follow-up questions in careful, measured tones, drawing out details that only someone who had been present could know. The color of the bad man's shoes, the sound her mother made when she fell, the way he had looked at Lily before telling her about the monsters. Through all of it, Lily spoke, haltingly at first, then with growing confidence as Briggs remained steady beside her. She described what she had seen with the fragmented clarity of a 3-year-old mind, painting a picture that filled in every gap the prosecution's evidence had left behind. Victor Stoll's mask shattered completely by the end. His hands were shaking. His face had gone the color of old paper. When the bailiffs led him from the courtroom after the judge called a recess, he refused to look in Lily's direction. Tessa finally allowed herself to breathe. The conviction came 3 days later. Victor Stoll received consecutive life sentences for murder and human trafficking. The network he had helped operate crumbled, as federal agents used the evidence from that hidden closet to dismantle operations in 3 states. 18 other survivors were identified and connected with support services. And in a quiet foster home on the outskirts of town, a little girl with blonde hair began speaking in full sentences for the first time in 2 months. Tessa arranged the visits herself. Every Sunday afternoon, she brought Briggs to the Henderson residence and watched as Lily raced across the yard to greet him. The hollow look in the child's eyes had faded, replaced by something that looked almost like childhood returning. She still had nightmares. She still flinched at sudden sounds. But she was healing, slowly and surely, with a Belgian Malinois as her bridge back to trust. Dr. Moss published a paper about the case that changed courtroom comfort animal protocols in 3 states. Defense attorneys still grumbled about the precedent, but judges began approving similar arrangements for traumatized child witnesses. Something had shifted. Something important. On the last visit before Lily's adoption was finalized by a permanent family, she pulled Tessa aside while Briggs dozed in a patch of sunlight. "Will I still see him?" she asked, her small hand clutching Tessa's fingers. Tessa knelt down so they were eye to eye. "As often as I can bring him." Lily nodded solemnly. Then she leaned forward and whispered, "He told me a secret in the courtroom, about the monsters." "What did he tell you?" Lily smiled, the first real smile Tessa had ever seen on her face. "He said they're only scary until you tell the truth. Then they go away forever." Tessa looked over at Briggs, who had lifted his head at the sound of Lily's voice. His tail wagged once, slowly. She had trusted him for 4 years, and he had never given her a reason to doubt.